Launched in 1959, the Vickers Vanguard was already competing against the Boeing 707 and the Douglas DC-8, both powered by jet engines. At the time, jets were new, and it became clear almost immediately that they were more advanced than turboprops, which suffered from higher noise levels, more vibration, and slower cruising speeds. Although the Vanguard was impressive for a turboprop, offering good speed, capacity, and reliability, it could not match the advantages of jets, which were faster, quieter, and smoother in operation. Pilots, however, didn't mind the noise as much. Many even considered it useful tactile feedback in the cockpit. But despite being designed as the successor to the highly successful Viscount, the Vanguard was obsolete almost as soon as it entered service, and its failure may have been an indirect factor in the eventual fall of Vickers as a major aircraft manufacturer.
The Viscount set an unexpected commercial standard in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Its first flight in July 1948 and entry into service with British European Airways in 1949 proved the turboprop could deliver a passenger experience superior to piston airliners. Higher cruise speeds, smoother ride, and vastly lower vibration than contemporary reciprocating designs. By the mid-1950s, the Viscount had become a global export success. Hundreds produced and sold to carriers from BEA to TransCanada Airlines. So airline planners began asking a familiar question: what's next? BEA and TransCanada specifically wanted a larger aircraft to take over denser trunk and medium-range routes where Viscount simply could not carry the load. Their brief called for higher payload, increased range, better payload mile economics, and the ability to operate from the varied airfields of Europe, Africa, and Canada. Hotter, higher, shorter runways were common on many Empire and Commonwealth routes. Vickers answered that commercial demand by proposing a clean-sheet turboprop scaled up to meet those requirements. Larger fuselage cross-section, reinforced wing and undercarriage to take heavier loads, and an internal layout designed to move more people or freight per cycle.
Central to the design was the Rolls-Royce Tyne, which was at the time the most powerful turboprop engine in production. Rated initially at around 5,730 shaft horsepower and later uprated beyond 6,000, the Tyne gave the Vanguard both the thrust and the reliability margins required to support a maximum takeoff weight more than double that of early Viscounts. Its power-to-weight characteristics enabled engineers to design for steep climb gradients, critical for obstacle clearance from shorter airfields, and for safe continuation of flight in the event of an engine failure at heavy weights. The wing was a key focus of the program. Vickers selected a relatively thick section that could house integral fuel tanks and a robust high-lift system. Engineers incorporated full-span leading-edge devices coupled with double-slotted Fowler flaps, allowing high lift coefficients at lower approach speeds. This configuration gave the Vanguard short-field capability unusual for an aircraft of its size, and allowed operations into airports with restrictive runway lengths, a major concern for BEA's European network and TCA's regional airfields. The wing was also designed to minimize drag at cruising altitudes, balancing the competing demands of field performance and efficient long-range flight. The fuselage was built around a wide cross-section, offering 6 abreast seating and a high-capacity belly hold. Structural design centered on a robust box beam arrangement, intended to endure intensive short-haul operations with multiple daily cycles. Anticipating varied uses, Vickers designed the airframe for flexibility. It could be laid out with dense single-class seating for 130 to 139 passengers, or configured in 2-class layouts with increased comfort on longer missions. The airframe's strength also made it ideal for eventual freight operations, a consideration that would later extend the Vanguard's operational life. Development was rapid by the standards of the day. Design freeze was reached in 1956, the first prototype, registration GAOYN, rolled out in early 1959, and the maiden flight took place from Brooklands on 20 January 1959 with Jock Bryce at the controls. The flight test program focused heavily on handling with full flap deployment, performance at maximum weight, and redundancy in key systems to meet airline reliability requirements. Certification trials emphasized short-field capability and climb performance, since these were central to the aircraft's appeal. By mid-1960, the program had advanced to route-proving trials, and type certification was achieved shortly before BEA placed its first aircraft into scheduled service in December of that year. Vickers had achieved its technical objectives, a rugged, versatile, high-capacity turboprop that met the operational briefs of its launch customers. But the very design choices that defined its performance, its reliance on powerful turboprops, a complex high-lift system, and structural robustness, would lock it into a market niche that was already under threat from the rise of faster, smoother jets.
In its baseline passenger configuration, the aircraft seated between 127 and 139 passengers depending on layout. BEA, the principal European operator, typically used a dense single-class configuration seating 135 to 139, which gave the type a clear step up from the Viscount 800, whose maximum capacity was around 89. The fuselage cross-section, wider than most contemporaries, allowed 6 abreast seating in economy, while still accommodating a comfortable 2-class layout for longer flights. Performance figures reflected Vickers' ambition to make the Vanguard not just larger, but significantly more capable than earlier turboprops. Powered by 4 Rolls-Royce Tyne 512 engines, rated at approximately 5,730 shaft horsepower each, the aircraft cruised at around 400 to 425 miles per hour, 0.60 to 2.70 Mach. This placed it among the fastest turboprops of the period, substantially ahead of piston-powered transports like the Douglas DC-6 or Lockheed Constellation, but still below the 500 to 550 mile-per-hour cruise of early jets such as the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8. Range performance was tailored to the specific missions of BEA and TCA. Standard payload range was around 1,800 to 2,000 miles, 2,900 to 3,200 kilometers, sufficient for non-stop transcontinental flights across Canada or for dense European routes. Ferry range stretched closer to 3,000 miles, 4,800 kilometers, demonstrating the type's efficiency at lighter loads. The aircraft's maximum takeoff weight was set at approximately 142,000 pounds, 64,400 kilograms, nearly double that of the Viscount. This gave it the payload capability needed for high-density routes, but it was also supported by an exceptionally strong landing gear system and reinforced floor structure. That strength made the Vanguard adaptable. It could carry not just passengers but heavy cargo, with main deck payload options facilitated by the wide fuselage and unobstructed hold. Operators later capitalized on this with conversions to freighter versions, capable of carrying over 40,000 pounds of freight on regional and transcontinental routes. The double-slotted Fowler flaps and leading-edge devices allowed approach speeds in the 95 to 105 knot range, markedly slower than same-era jets, which typically required 120 to 130 knots. Landing distances of under 4,500 feet were routine, making it viable at airports with runway limitations. This was particularly valuable in BEA's European network, which included airports like Edinburgh and Belfast, and for TCA operations into smaller regional fields across Canada. For comparison, early Boeing 727s, designed with improved short-field ability, still required longer runways and higher approach speeds, giving the Vanguard a niche advantage. In efficiency terms, the turboprop design delivered lower fuel burn per hour compared to jets on short sectors. However, once stage lengths extended beyond 500 to 600 miles, the faster turnaround and higher daily utilization of jets such as the DC-9 began to erode this advantage. Jets could complete more rotations per day and offered passengers smoother, quieter rides, reducing the appeal of even the most capable turboprops. On paper, the Vanguard retained competitive seat-mile economics for dense, short routes, but airlines planning for fleet modernization were increasingly prioritizing speed and passenger perception over pure operating cost. Structurally, the Vanguard proved robust in service. Its airframe was certificated for intensive daily use, with the expectation of 8 to 10 cycles per day in BEA service. Operators reported that the aircraft could absorb this punishing schedule with fewer fatigue issues than some contemporaries, and the Tyne engines, while expensive to overhaul, delivered reliable power once teething problems were resolved. The aircraft's strong floor-loading limits, designed into the fuselage from the outset, allowed it to carry cargo that many narrow-body jets of the era could not match. This structural foresight made the later merchantman freighter conversion straightforward, and those freighters would go on to outlast passenger versions by more than 2 decades.
Against competitors, the Vanguard represented both strengths and weaknesses. Compared with the Boeing 727, which entered service in 1964, the Vanguard offered similar seating capacity but was outclassed on speed by more than 100 miles per hour. The Douglas DC-9, introduced in 1965, carried slightly fewer passengers but offered far greater daily utilization. Yet the Vanguard retained a field performance edge, allowing it to reach airports inaccessible to first-generation jets. In the early 1960s, this was a meaningful advantage. By the late 1960s, as airports extended runways and jets improved their performance, the advantage rapidly diminished.
The Vanguard was doomed by circumstance rather than design. Only 44 were ever built, an astonishingly low number for a mainline airliner of its time. By the early 1960s, the jet age was not just emerging, it was accelerating at a pace no turboprop could match. Carriers worldwide were eager to advertise jet service, associating it with modernity, speed, and prestige. Even when the Vanguard offered lower per-cycle costs on shorter routes, marketing departments and passengers overwhelmingly favored jets like the Boeing 727, Douglas DC-9, and Caravelle. While its passenger career was short-lived, the Vanguard found a surprising second life. Beginning in the late 1960s, BEA initiated a program to convert Vanguards into freighters. The modification included reinforced floors, large cargo doors, and systems tailored for freight handling. These merchantman conversions transformed the type into one of the most capable turboprop freighters of its day. As merchantmen, the aircraft proved invaluable for carrying mail, express parcels, and general cargo across Europe. Their wide fuselage and strong airframe gave them flexibility to carry heavier, bulky loads, and their ability to use shorter runways made them versatile for secondary airports. Some operated well into the 1990s, serving with carriers such as British Airways Cargo and later with private cargo operators. For nearly 3 decades beyond the end of its passenger life, the Vanguard in merchantman guise became a familiar sight in night skies over Britain and Europe, proving that while passengers may have turned away from turboprops, the basic design still had decades of utility left to give. The Vanguard was technically sound, respected by pilots, and reliable in service, but it was outdated almost as soon as it entered the market. Few were built, yet those that were found long-term use in freight and mail operations well beyond their passenger years. It wasn't a failure of design, it was a victim of timing. Now it's your turn. Did you fly on a Vanguard or know someone who did? Could it have survived if introduced earlier? Drop your thoughts in the comments.